which is preventative maintenance. And then 2.57, 2.58, 2.59 or 10, which is asset acquisitions or disposal. The 2.5 monitoring report actually goes to the Board of Education tonight. So you all will be hearing a few bits and pieces of what they've put in their report that will be presented to the Board of Education this evening. And since we do have Chris, Joe, and Margie on the line, they will be going over the preventative maintenance portion of the monitoring report, which is the 2.52 and 2.53. Now, those of you that are on the FAC that are here, you know that we have the spreadsheet that you can open up. There's some guiding questions. If you have any, if you don't have any just regular questions that you want to ask after they do their kind of discussion, there's some guiding questions in the Excel document. And that is also where you can put any of your notes regarding today's discussion. So with that, I will turn it over to the preventative maintenance team to kind of discuss what they are reporting in their monitoring report to the board.
Hi, everybody. I'm Margie Ammon. I'm our Director of Facilities Design, and I complete the part or the data for the deferred maintenance piece, which is at the beginning of 2.5.2. Under the data reported, it talks about the estimated total deferred maintenance comes out of Cost Lab, which is our software program that we manage and we keep all of our buildings in. Currently, the reporting for this reporting period, it was almost $97.5 million of deferred maintenance, which is approximately 9.13% of our total replacement value for the district. So we are under the 10%, which is required. We're not to exceed that currently. You'll notice an asterisk below that piece that talks about us possibly navigating to a new software in the future. And if and when that does happen, our deferred maintenance will probably go up. And that is because of differences in how softwares like to estimate deferred maintenance. It's a pretty in-depth conversation, so I'll leave it at that, and we'll probably cover it next year because our deferred maintenance could go up quite a bit. Are there any questions about that piece? Right, and then the piece about the plant contingency fund, I think that's in between both of our departments. And Pat Hamilton typically kind of manages and watches it. I don't know, Chris, if you know a lot about it. I don't believe we've spent any funds out of the 3% or out of what we're holding in the plant contingency fund, and we are, I believe we're under that 3% is the max that we're allowed to have. Is that right? Am I reading that right? Yes. So we're right now at 1.3. And that is all I know about that one. I don't get into a lot of details with the plant contingency fund. I don't know, Chris, if you do either. I think it's really more Pat Hamilton, but we are under the 3%.
Yeah, to my knowledge, we haven't spent any. Your statement is accurate, Margie, that is Pat that would work with, I assume, Susie and the board and Chris on that. But to my knowledge, we haven't used any of that money this year.
And I think it's set up for like if there was a really large event, like a weather event or something, that we didn't have enough in cap or something major happened to a building, we would probably take it out of there. That is what I know. So I think the next section would be Chris and Joe, unless anyone has questions on my section.
What are the biggest areas of deferred maintenance? I mean, I guess I'm a little confused or not clear. So we passed the bond in whatever, 2016. Obviously, I mean, I had toured some of the buildings then the following year with 5-Star Leadership Academy. So I saw where the monies were going. So what, are we just continuing with that, with things that couldn't make that list? Or what are the biggest, or do we have a lot of aging out buildings still after these couple of years of the bond expenditures? Or where are you seeing the biggest deferred maintenance happening?
Is this Kathy speaking?
Yes, yes, Kathy,
okay.
sorry. Yep.
Yeah, no problem. Hi. So
turn-
yeah, I think
wherever.
we're still trying to catch up. You know, we went for, was it 12 years without a bond? And so we have focused this past bond on a lot of deferred maintenance and some aesthetic gold pieces, but catching up after 12 years is quite a task. So although we caught up a lot, new things have become deferred. I would say our highest dollar amounts lie in the systems of our buildings, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and a lot of site. We have a lot of site items, roofs. So the big dollar items now at some buildings that maybe weren't deferred when we went for the bond have become deferred. So that's, I would say that's where the items lie. We caught up a lot, but it's still going up because new things are becoming deferred. And also keep in mind, even though something is deferred, it is still operational and it might be able to keep going for 5-10 years, but it's technically beyond its life.
Okay.
So we may maintain it, obviously,
Right.
to keep our schools open.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi there, it's Kelly Bergstrom, and I'm sorry I was late, but maybe I missed it. What is the plant?
It's just all of our facilities.
The overall
Yes.
operations. Okay.
Adams
Got it.
12, well, Adams 12 buildings, I
As a
think
whole.
is what the plant is considered. Yep.
Okay. Got it. Thank you very much.
You're
Sorry about
welcome.
that.
No problem. You're welcome.
Amy, do Joe and I need to address anything or just answer questions? The 2.5 report's a little different this year. It's sort of streamlined compared to years past, and I don't see the specific information that Joe and I used to report on in terms of like work orders and things like that. So I'm either missing it or happy to answer questions, but there was an awkward silence there, like we were supposed to do something, and I don't know what you want me to do.
Yeah, I was just looking over the 2.5 monitor report too, and I was like, boy, there's a lot, it is a lot kind of smaller, I think, than in past years. And so I think, in past years, we've done this same kind of routine where we have a few FAC members interview you all, and you guys give some information about how everything is maintained, what are your benchmarks, and so forth. So now that we're presenting this to the entire FAC, we would like to be able to just maybe make sure everyone on the FAC kind of understands all that goes into to maintaining it, how you manage this. I know you use this stuff in School Dude, and you use this in, what was the other system called? Cost Lab. Maybe just kind of give a brief overview of, the different systems and how it helps you manage things and how it helps you track, and how you're identifying, those items are going into deferred maintenance and so forth like that. Just kind of give an overview so they have a better understanding.
Sure. Margie, do you want to start with Cost Lab, just since you can go there, and then Joe and I can handle the School Dude portion?
Sure, absolutely. So Cost Lab, like I mentioned before, is a software that tracks the life cycle of all of our building components. So every building in our district is in the system, and parts and pieces or components of the buildings are in the system. The software is managed by CB Richard Ellis, and what they do is they put costs in there to replace items, to maintain them, and the life cycle of a piece of equipment. So when that piece of equipment is beyond its life, let's say an HVAC unit on the roof has 15 years of life. Once it reaches that, then it would be noted as deferred maintenance, and it would track a cost to replace that. So that's what the cost lab item does. And we work with the maintenance team to update that annually and to track components of our buildings within the cost lab database. And we meet with schools about it as well. It has finishes, it has all systems. So that's what that piece is. I think that's pretty basic overview. Joe?
Yeah, and then I'll just give a brief overview, Joe, of School Dude, and then you can fill in the pieces. School Dude is our day-to-day work order system. So there are essentially 5 pieces that would touch our work order system. Preventative maintenance. Obviously, in a perfect world, we would be more on a prevent equipment from breaking and then fixing it. Unfortunately, we're a little upside down on that. So we're behind, and we do a lot of corrective maintenance instead of preventative maintenance. That's the second piece, is corrective maintenance, so fixing things. We also have a couple of additional categories. So emergency, we have timelines for people to submit work orders. So if it's nothing that's mission critical, it would get a lower importance, so to speak. So preventative maintenance, we do that regularly. Corrective maintenance, if it's not an emergency, we'll have a certain time, typically 1 to 3 days. And then if it's an emergency and it's impacting a school, for example, today, one of our HVAC systems went down at one of our middle schools. So that would be designated as an emergency. So it's gets the highest priority, and our teams are out there trying to get that HVAC unit up right now. And then 2 additional pieces to that are FMR, so a facility modification request, and then a CUR, which is a change of use request. So a facility modification request is anything that would impact the building or change the building. A good example is taking out an old drinking fountain, the bubblers type drinking fountain, and putting in a water bottle filler, something like that. If it is going to require our trades to go in and tear into walls and modify the building, that would be a facility modification request. So there's a supplemental form that then gets tied to the work order system so that we can keep track of it. And then a change of use is a little more significant. If the building is going to change the designation of a classroom, what we've seen lately is taking computer labs and changing those to just a regular type classroom. And that's a little more in depth, and it involves not only Joe and our maintenance team, but usually will require Margie and her team to get involved too, to make sure that we have proper ventilation, proper egress for fire, things like that. So change of use is a little more impactful, and that would also tie to our work order system. So kind of an overview. Joe, do you want to fill in the pieces and answer anything that I didn't throw in there?
Sure, I can add a little bit. Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Steven. I'm the maintenance manager for the district. So I directly oversee the maintenance department, all the various trades, and work right underneath Mr. Wilderman. So yeah, pretty much as Chris said, School Dude, just to clarify, is a brand name for our chosen computerized maintenance management system. CMMS, or work order system, is kind of the common term for it. So that's where schools will enter these various types of work orders. Our technicians receive those work orders, prioritize them, and track all their labor hours, any material or parts expenses, all that sort of thing is kind of tracked within that system. It doesn't really integrate directly with Cost Lab or our finance system. So We still have to do the actual financial tracking in the district's financial system. And as far as if a work order, it doesn't happen often where it goes that way, but often we'll make a repair, but it might not be a complete repair, or it might not be a, parts might be no longer available. So we have to, put some type of Band-Aid fix on it to keep the unit running, or whatever the case may be. So then it's somewhat of a manual process within the district where our technicians do what's called an audit. That's both a process and a type of work order that they receive. And that's where we input data into Margie's cost lab. I just say Margie's because she kind of owns that program, but that's where our technicians will actually enter information they know about deferred maintenance into the cost lab system. So cost lab does its own tracking based on industry norms, and it knows, windows should last at, 30 years, whatever it is. That's, don't quote me on that number, but X amount of years. And then anything that's not tracking the way cost lab says it is, we enter manually through that audit process. Guys will go out and survey all the schools and write up reports on what they want to add to our deferred maintenance list, which becomes part of future bond planning activities. So I think that's all I wanted to add, unless anyone has any questions I can help answer.
I'm just curious, based on what Chris mentioned, or maybe, I'm sorry, maybe it was you, I can't remember. Are you seeing with the increase in personal electronics, or, most kids having computers and such, that that most schools are kind of not having computer labs anymore? Is that kind of, just wondering if that's sort of a trend that it's becoming passe because so much is happening in the classroom with technology now?
We have decommissioned a lot of our computer labs and converted them into a standard classroom or another type of use. So yes, but some schools, middle and high, mostly still have computer labs. Elementary, a few still do, but most have repurposed those rooms. But if there's specialized software that a school needs, we still need a computer lab for that, because the laptops or the small Chromebooks can't typically handle a specialized type of software. Does
Sure,
that
that
answer
makes
your
sense.
question?
Yes, I was
Okay.
just curious. It seemed like it would a trend that, I mean, just that would make sense based on the schools invest, partly because of COVID, and also just because the proliferation of just needing personal devices
Yes.
because so much happens on computer and is turned in electronically, as opposed to even at the younger grades anymore. They're using less and less paper, it seems. And then my other question is about most of the time. I mean, I know the phone systems work. Are fine. Every once in a while, very rarely get an email that says the phone system is down currently, and my kids are in high school. So of course, most high schoolers have phones. So that's not as much of an issue, but do you foresee, are we planning to keep landlines going into all the schools? Is that, because it would seem to me that'd be still kind of, although in homes, it feels outdated. A lot of people don't have those. Are we anticipating keeping those kind of systems in our schools?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, we just, as part of this bond, we completely refreshed our phone system. So there's a lot more to the phones than just a typical making a call. We can activate our emergency response alarms, so tornado warnings, lockdown warnings, things like that through the landlines. Because of our new voice over IP phones, first responders can go straight to a classroom. They know exactly which classroom an emergency may be coming from, instead of years past where they would just know it was the building and then they would have to check in at the main office. I mean, they still typically do that. They don't know exactly where all the classrooms are, but the phones are a lot more advanced now and can do a lot more than just two-way communication. So yeah, I definitely don't see our phones going anywhere anytime soon.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
I can add a little more to that if you'd like to. We have, as Chris mentioned, we upgraded our phones to IP based, but they're all on our own fiber network now as well. So they're not the old copper telephone lines. We still have just a handful of copper lines in every building that's for emergency use, for like the elevator phones, that if you're trapped in an elevator, you can make a call. So some of those are still kind of legally required. We're navigating through that process right now and trying to upgrade those as well, because old phone line companies don't really support copper technology anymore. So that used to be the code standard because it was very stable. Now it's not. Copper is not very stable because phone line companies aren't maintaining their copper lines anymore. So that's still a bit of a process that we're working through with IT. I don't think anybody in IT is here. So eventually I think we're going to get to a point where we don't have any actual copper lines in any schools anymore.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to comment that I loved hearing the fact that you do an audit on the cost lab and go back and do all of those updates and just making sure that it's kept in line with what your technicians are seeing. I am curious though, how often or how much do your technicians find as part of that audit? Just ballpark, nothing, just sheer curiosity.
I think it varies, and we, just to give a little more background on our audit, we audit a fifth of our district every year. So in a 5-year cycle, we audit the entire district. So each year we audit about 5 million square feet. And our maintenance techs have, when they go out to audit a scheduled building, they have the list of deferred items, and they either tell us more has been deferred, or, oh, by the way, we ended up taking care of this item and we take it off of the list. I don't think we have a count. I haven't ever gone each year and tracked how many new items get added to the list. We recently did a massive renewal and recheck of our deferred maintenance this past spring, and as we're doing our long range plan. So it has been greatly updated. Every year though, it gets better and better. So I don't typically track how many come in every year.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Just curious, having done audits in the past, you find things to make it better. So if it's improving every year, bonus.
Yeah, I think it is.
Awesome.
We train our people every year how to do the audits, how to use we use Google for them to fill everything out. So it's never going to be perfect, but I think it gets better each year. And we're hoping if we do upgrade to a different software, that'll also improve our tracking system and our deferred maintenance tracking.
Excellent. And then one other question, we hear it across all of the district departments. How's your staffing level? You have enough people? Do you have the staff you need? Are you getting them?
I can speak to that a little bit. Maintenance is not as bad off as some of the other departments. Chris also manages custodial. He could probably talk all day about the issues that they're seeing on that side of the house, since they're more kind of entry level positions. But currently we only have 1 vacancy. Our positions have been pretty difficult to fill. They're taking close to 6 months and not getting a large volume of applicants right now. The biggest one we struggle with, and it creates a domino effect with curb appeal, basically, is we hire, we call them seasonals. There are crew that we hire during the summer that are just temporary help that comes in during the summer and helps mow and weed eat and spray weeds and remove weeds and that kind of thing. Those positions have been really difficult to fill. We've upped the pay rate quite a bit over the past few years, and that doesn't seem to be affecting it too much. And I think there's just a lot of competition out there in that market, and it's really hard to fill those positions. So, and we just don't have enough full-time staff in-house to keep up. And we've gone to contracting some of that when we can't fill those positions. But contracting is a lot more expensive than it is to do that work in-house. So we can only do so much with our budgets when we contract out mowing and things. So we had about 12 of those positions funded. And normally we can only hire, last few years, I should say, we've only been able to hire about 3 or 4. And a lot of those are paras and bus drivers that just want to work 12 months a year because they're off during the summer. So they'll come and help us mow during the summer. And then they're only here from July and August, and then they go back to school. So they're only here for 6 or 8 weeks or whatever it is. So, and also right in the summer is kind of when the grass slows down. We need them more in the spring and the fall when we're getting more moisture and the grass is growing real heavy, but we'll take whatever help we can get at this point. So that's kind of where we're at with staffing levels and maintenance.
I would answer that question from a different angle. Joe sort of commented on current labor staffing. I'm going to answer more from just the regular full-time staff that we should have. We've added a lot of ground with additions to schools and things like that. And I hate to actually say this because I try and get my team away from saying this, but during the recession years in the mid 2000s, we lost a lot of people to budget cuts. And the one department that we haven't been able to refill that is the grounds department, like Joe was saying. And so being shorthanded already in our outside services and then adding locations has put us behind the 8 ball, in my opinion. If it was up to me, we would probably have 3 more positions in the maintenance department for the grounds. And then I would say at least 2 more, if not 3 more in custodial, just to help manage the schools. So we have been very flat on being able to add positions with the growth. So from my perspective, like everybody else, we've slowly been catching up a little bit. Going down a totally different angle, a few years ago when we passed the mill levy and we were able to put mental health people in our buildings was huge, just absolutely incredible. That was so needed and so important. And I would never ask to trump that. That was a lot more important than mowing grass, in my opinion. But at the same time, we have grown our district and have stayed very flat with some of our maintenance and custodial positions. So if it was up to me, we would probably add 3 more in maintenance and 3 more in custodial just to try and keep up with the expectations.
And I would say the same from our perspective, from our department. If we could really manage our deferred maintenance software full out, we should have a full-time person dedicated to it full-time. And we have myself that works on it and another person who also does a lot of other tasks. So if all was great and we had more money and resources, that's what I would hope for. The management of deferred maintenance and audit could be a full-time job to coordinate Joe's team and to keep the data better. So, but otherwise, right now we're down to pre-bond staff, so we're pretty small.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the answers.
Okay, we've reached the time limit for the preventative maintenance section. Does anybody have any final questions before we allow them to move on with their day? No. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it. Thanks for all the wonderful information. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then our next section is to talk about the asset acquisitions and disposal. Before I turn this over to Matt, I just wanted to mention we were notified that we need to make these meetings public. And although we record them and we post these recordings, we also have had to make this so that it can be watched via the YouTube channel. So I just wanted to make sure you all were aware that starting today, this will be on the YouTube channel. Although I'm not seeing a link from the board docs, so I'm thinking that you must have to just go to YouTube and type in Finance and Audit Committee. But I'll check with Sonia for the next meeting to see if they're supposed to post the link like they do for the board meetings or not. But just so you all know, you will be YouTube stars. So how exciting. And so we're going to go ahead and now turn this over to Matt Schaefer. Again, did everyone, if anyone who joined late, can you still see the chat with the links that were provided earlier? I just want to make sure. Because we did put the monitoring report workbook, so you can then now go to section 2.57. It'll be 2.57, 2.58, and 2.510. It all kind of talks about asset disposals. And then there's also a link to the board docs for this evening, which has the link to the monitoring report 2.5, which is being presented this evening. And so I just want to make sure you all have access to that.
They're not there.
They're not there?
For me.
Okay.
Yeah, I joined late and I don't
Okay.
see them.
Let me go ahead and copy these down to everyone. Paste. And let me get this one. Copy and paste. Okay, so now everyone hopefully should have those. So if you want to see those, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Matt. Matt, as the monitoring report is being presented to the board this evening, if you just want to kind of go over the results of what is being submitted, and then allow for any questions. And then if you have any other information you want to share, generally in the past, we had always done this in a smaller group where you might have had one or maybe two people interview. Now we're including the whole Finance and Audit Committee. So there may just be some background information about how you manage all the property, the acquisitions and so forth, that you might just want to share some background just to give everyone a nice overview as well.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Matt Schaefer. I'm the planning manager here in Adams 12. So property acquisition, the vast majority of the property we acquire is small stuff that doesn't meet the $500,000 threshold to be included in the monitoring report, but I always still talk about it with you guys every year. So I'm not sure what sort of background other than that. I mean, we do a lot of little easements and little weird stuff. We don't go out and purchase large parcels of land very often. The last one we purchased was in 2018 for Future Forward Washington Square. So in this monitoring period, which I understand is July 1, 20 through June 30, 21, we have one land transaction for a value of $201,000. And that was a combination of three things. It was a transportation easement, a temporary construction, so the transportation easement is perpetual, a temporary construction easement that ended after construction, and then a purchase of 40,000 square feet. And basically we purchased the north side of 126th on the north end of Future Forward at Washington Square. When we bought that property, the parcel included the south end of 126th, but not the north. We tried to acquire that land to the north, and unfortunately that we were not able to come to terms with that landowner. So instead, we did this. We purchased the northern half of 126th so we could build the road that would give us access to our school. And by the way, we have a side process going on with Phil Spare where he's going to get reimbursement for that developer's half share of that road cost. So we will get reimbursement, which we're excited about. Yeah, so this deal, it was under threat of condemnation. It happened at the courts. We did not actually go through the condemnation process, but under threat of condemnation, we arrived at this deal. So it was 40,000 square feet for the road, 575 square feet for the transportation easement, 200-ish square feet for the temp construction easement, and then the total value being $201,000. There was an appraisal on that one, of course, because it was done through the courts. We had to get our own appraisal, and then we had to pay for the other side to also get their own appraisal. And so this was in line with those appraisals, but under the 500K. Is there anything I should add or before we open to questions maybe? Okay.
No, I think you're good to open it for questions.
All right, everyone. So any questions on this or any other thing related to land and real estate?
What's the projected growth? I mean, are we planning to buy any more big plots of land for new schools? What's our district, what's the projection for growth in that way?
We've done, I think we're on our 6th search for land. So every 6 months or so, we contact our brokers and ask them what's going on. And they're out there looking for us too. I guess I should answer the quick question quickly or directly. Yes, we do have some funds left over in the last bond to purchase land. And Mr. Godowski would like us to be securing a 3rd CTE site or some other sort of non-traditional school site to be determined. So he wants us to get land in the north central part of the district. It's been a challenge. All of the land we've looked at has either been very expensive to develop or just not the right size or fit. So we're still out there looking, but unfortunately in the open market, there just hasn't been anything that we've been interested in. So yeah, under the last bond, we just bought that parcel for Future Forward Washington Square. We have some money left to buy something else.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
So Matt, this is Kelly. I think I've interviewed you before.
Yes, hi, Kelly.
How are you? So just curious, I know that you don't have to keep the bond apprised of this type of transaction since it's less than the cap, but in the past, I typically have seen that they are involved. Just curious how much the board was involved with this.
Oh, they were super involved because of the threat of condemnation. And we thought we were going to maybe purchase the actually 3 parcels owned by this landowner to the north of us that was about 10 acres when you combine them. So they were definitely involved. There was executive sessions where Phil updated them on the progress in the courts. Yeah, so they were definitely involved.
Excellent, thank you.
You bet. And this was an issue. This was a situation where if we didn't get this, we wouldn't have access to the school. And you have to have 2 access points for fire. We had the one on the south, which is now an unofficial access just for fire. And we didn't have the official way to get into the parcel. So this really had to happen. And that's why we ended up going through the courts when we felt like the other side was being a little more difficult than we had hoped.
Okay, I just to kind of go in line with the monitor report, it says on here that the district had 12 purchases of property, real or otherwise, in excess of $500,000 during this monitoring period. All the purchases involved bond implementation or were otherwise approved.
Where is that?
Oh, it's in the monitoring report. So if you click on the,
I definitely did not write that.
oh, okay. Okay.
I think that's a mistake. 12?
Yeah.
12 purchases over 500,000?
Yeah, and so I didn't, I'm assuming maybe that also has to do with like some of our like tangible like software and so forth. So I didn't know if you were involved in any of that as well.
Well, software is not real property. So no, I'm just, I thought this section was purely for real property.
No, and that's why I was just asking if you were involved in any of the discussions about how this was put together. So it looks like
No, wait a minute. I was gonna say, could it be for the fiber project? But we didn't buy that much land for the fiber project. Where is it? Because I'm under 2.5, 7, 8, and 10, and I don't see that.
So 2.57.
Must have.
It'll say data reported. The district had 12 purchases of property, real or otherwise, in excess of 500,000 during this monitoring report. The purchases involved bond implementation or were otherwise approved by the board in a bond override plan or general budget.
So maybe I'm not seeing that in the, so I copied some of the stuff and I just am not seeing that. Hold on. I'm going to open the link that you just put in.
Okay. And what I will do, team, is I will talk with Pat and Ash about who responded to this so that at least we can get get another individual on here for another meeting so we can talk about that response. Yeah,
What page are you on, Mimi?
on 9.
Oh, I wonder if that, no, because that's you, I would go to Pat for that. Yeah, I don't know what that is. Could it have been school buses? But 12 just seems like a lot. So no, it's definitely not real estate.
Correct. Yeah. And I knew it wasn't real estate.
Okay.
That's why, but I didn't know if there was a team of you who collaborated to.
Well, Pat shares out a document and then we each put in our piece, and I
Okay.
just do 2.5, 7, 8, and 10.
Yes.
So this must have come in. What's confusing me here is it's under section 8. What does that correlate to? 2.5.8?
Well, it also is under 2.7, 2.57.
Yeah, so I did not put that in for Pat's thing. He didn't tell me he was putting that in. So I would refer back to Pat.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh. Not at all. Oh, there's so much that happens in this district that I don't know about.
Okay. So perfect.
But
So apologize.
I can guarantee it's not real estate. It could be some other real property, which I'm at a bit of a loss, but maybe something to do with the fiber project.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so definitely team, I will do a follow-up on that and
You want me to text him?
Oh, you know what? We've got the audit that's
Okay.
going to be next here. So I don't,
Okay.
and I don't want to put him on the spot either. So
He will know, but I'll ask him when I see him next, and he'll be ready
Okay.
for you when you get it, find him.
perfect. Perfect.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, does anybody else have any questions for Matt? Okay. Well,
I think
thank you.
You bet.
Oh.
This has been good. I think my takeaway is next year I need to make sure there's not other real property other than real estate that people are putting on this document.
Yes, perfect. We appreciate
right.
that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you betcha. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye,
Have a good
everybody.
one. Bye. Okay, so the next agenda item is to go over our fiscal year 2020, 2021 audit. We are being joined by our audit firm, it's Clifton Larson Allen. And you know, I was practicing saying your name right all morning. And you know, now that I have to say it, I'm gonna probably butcher it again. And so I'm just gonna let you say your last name, but John Paul is with us, and we want to turn the floor over to him so that he can go over the results of our financial and single audit for the prior fiscal year.
All right, thanks, Mimi. As Mimi said, my name's John Paul Le Chevalier. It's a very French last name, though I will sadly admit that my oldest sister, who's a French teacher, got all of the language speaking ability. I took French 1 3 times, so the foreign language was not my specialty in school. And actually, we have some cousins from France, and they say that I'm saying our last name wrong. So I don't know. It sounds exactly the same to me, but so I understand, Mimi. Everyone seems to struggle with the last name. So again, my name is John Paul Le Chevalier. I was the lead auditor for the district's fiscal year 21 financial audit. So, and Mimi, would you let me know, do we have the entire rest of the meeting, or I guess how long do we expect? Okay.
Yep, you have the rest of the meeting. Yes.
All right, sounds good. So try not to go into too much detail on all the financials, but I did want to spend the majority of the meeting to go through the document and what's included in each of the different sections. And really this meeting is for the Finance and Audit Committee's benefit. So if there's any areas that you want to pause, take a little bit more time to ask questions or understand, please feel free to interrupt me at any time, and we can kind of spend a little bit more time going through any of those sections. So again, I'll share my screen. I know that there were some slides that were attached to the presentation as well, but I think really we'll kind of focus for this meeting going through the actual document. And again, just it's almost 200 pages, so it can be pretty intimidating, but we'll try to walk through each of the different areas. So you know, if you're looking later for information within there, you kind of know what section to look at. for each, for whatever information you're looking through. So let me share my screen. All right, can everyone see that? All right, great. So we'll start, we'll just go kind of start to finish through the document. So to begin with, looking at PDF page 11, you'll see the transmittal letter. So this starts with some of the kind of qualitative or achievements of the district throughout the past fiscal year. And I should mention that the fiscal year was ended June 30th. So we are looking at some dated information at this point. It does take a while for the district to close their financial statements. That is a pretty common time frame for it to take, a couple of months to close everything, get everything organized as needed to be able to close the financial statements. We are just a tad bit later with this presentation than normal, which was similar to last year due to the COVID pandemic. There were some delays. Well, so there was some additional federal funding, as I'm sure you're aware, but then the guidance relating to auditing those federal funds was delayed both last year and then with the change in federal administration, they changed the guidance again. And so there was another delay this year. So we're optimistic that next year things will be kind of closer to normal, what they were prior to the pandemic, but just a little bit of additional information on the timing. The one other thing that I wanted to point out at this point is you'll see here that the report is referred to as the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. If you've been around for more than 1 year, you may be familiar with that being called the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. So basically flip-flopping the first two words. There was a change nationwide to change the name of this report. The previous acronym, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board received feedback that the previous acronym in certain other parts of the world could sound like an ethnic slur. And so they decided to change that for inclusivity and making sure that in the United States it wasn't an issue, but if some of these documents were being shared internationally, probably not Adams 12 too much international, but for other entities that were having their financial statements shared, they did want to change the name. So that's why you'll see everything referred to as the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. And again, this first transmittal letter is some of the achievements, qualitative information. This is not audited, but it can give a little bit more information surrounding what happened during fiscal year 21. So moving on to PDF page 20, you'll see the Certificate of Achievement. So this relates to last year's financial statements. And so this document would be presented to the Government Finance Officers Association to receive the certificate again for this year. So there's always a 1-year lag with the presentation of this certificate. And this is an additional thing that the district does to have their financial statements reviewed by the Government Finance Officers Association, make sure that any accounting policies have been updated appropriately, that amounts are presented correctly. It's basically an additional review and then a certificate of achievement for passing that review. So again, kudos to the district, though that was for last year's financial statements, and the district is expecting to submit and receive that certificate again for this year. So we'll move on to PDF page 24. So this is the Independent Auditors Report. So this is really CLA's report within the financial statements. So this is kind of our section. The rest of the document, at least until we get into the single audit, is all of the district's information. So this Independent Auditors Report is what we refer to as an unmodified or a clean audit opinion, which is the highest level of an audit report that you can receive. But it's also really what the district should be expecting. To get any other type of audit report would be an indication of significant, very significant issues. So again, kudos to the district for receiving that, and it is something that the district should be expecting to receive every year. So you can see on the second page of the audit report that has our opinion. And so this is kind of really the key paragraph within our audit report, which is stating that in our opinion and based on our audit procedures performed, that the financial statements are materially correct and can be relied upon. And so one thing to keep in mind is that our audit is designed to be performed really more as kind of a collaborative effort, kind of more as maybe more than just editors of the document, but this isn't an interrogation or an investigative process. This is really more in collaboration with district's management, that they put the financial statements together. We're double checking that everything in there is correct. So the purpose of our audit is really to make sure that the district has internal controls in place so that all of the processes can result in materially correct information, and then to double check the amounts that are included. So our audit is not designed to review for fraud. If we detected fraud, that would be something that we would report to the board immediately, but we're not specifically designing, I'd say 99% of our audit is not designed to be reviewing for fraud. The other thing that we're not looking at is that the best use of the funds is made. So that's really kind of outside of the scope of the audit. And really that's up to the district and to the district's governance. So the board, that you're really the ones making the determination on what the best use of the funding that the district receives is. So those are kind of two things to keep in mind that are really outside of the scope of our audit, and that we're really focused on making sure that the information included within the financial statements is correct. We'll talk about the single audit in just a couple of minutes, which is the audit over federal awards. And so we do have some specific compliance related procedures that we perform over making sure that that funding was used appropriately. So that would be kind of the one area where we do look more at the intent of the expenditures that the district had during fiscal year 21. But otherwise, we'd really be focused more on making sure that the amounts presented are correct. So moving to PDF page 30, this is the management discussion and analysis section. If you're reviewing the financial statements for the first time, I normally kind of suggest that this is the first place to start. It can give a little bit more context as to why the amounts are the way that they are, and describe some comparative information from last year's financials compared to this year. So that can give a little bit more context if you're not overly familiar with all of the annual financial reports from the last however many years of the district, that this can give a lot more context and help you better understand the financial information. So won't spend too much time going through it since we will be looking at the financial statements coming up next here. But again, if you were going to read through the financial statements, I'd recommend that this would be one of the starting areas to kind of get a feel for what's included, what things changed, and why. Moving on to the actual financial statements themselves, beginning on PDF page 46. So we'll start with the statement of net position. And one thing to keep in mind is that the district does, on their annual financial statements, present two sets of financials. There's one set that includes, and this is the one we're looking at right now, this set includes long-term items. And then the second set is going to be including really only things focused within a 1 year time frame. So it's going to be a much more current or shorter focused view of the district's financial position. In practice, what that means is that one set of financial statements is going to include your capital assets, so your buildings, vehicles, equipment, those types of things. And then it's also going to include down here your long-term debt as well as your net pension liability. And so those are really kind of the big items that change between the two sets of financials. The item that I know we normally discuss each year, though I know we do have some new faces on the call this morning, is the net pension liability. So what this is the Colorado PARA, the pension defined benefit pension plan that the district participates in. If they were to take all of their projected benefit payments, looking out into the future, as well as the amounts that they expect to be contributed, the investment earnings that they expect, and kind of compare those two numbers, and then allocate out a portion that is expected to relate to the district, that would be this net pension liability. So that information comes directly from PARA. The district takes that and puts that on their financial statements. One thing to keep in mind is that the district couldn't pay that net pension liability even if you wanted to. It's really kind of more of an informational disclosure. That does mean that since this is a pretty significant liability balance, it does mean that PARA does have a projected deficit. And so this is kind of that projected deficit allocated to the district, and would need to be, in order to continue funding those future pension payments, they'll need to come up with some way of either increasing the amount contributed by employees, decreasing benefits, or otherwise funding that net pension liability. But that's really kind of more on PARA and less on the district.
John Paul, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So really, this is always going to be there because PARA's policy is that we should be fully funded within 30 years. And what this does is basically says we have a pension liability because we're not fully funded today, but PARA's policy basically says we're never going to be, we don't plan on being fully funded today. We're looking at a 30-year runway. Is that a true statement?
I would say that that's mostly true. The state has put into place some additional steps to try and closer fully fund the school defined benefit trust fund. And so there are some additional things. So I mean, I guess what you're saying, there probably is always going to be a net pension liability. I don't think that they'll probably ever get to the point where they have a surplus, but I do think that they're taking steps to try and reduce the size of this net pension liability. A couple of those things, they do have some automatic increases in the required contributions, both for employers and employees. And then the other big item is that the state of Colorado is making a $225 million direct payment to PARA each year to try and reduce the amount of this net pension liability that's then allocated to every employer. So PARA's liability is not 764 million, that, or in total, that would be just the small portion that relates to Adams 12 school district. So they are taking some steps to reduce this net pension liability, though I do agree, Susie. I don't think that not any time in the near future would you ever expect to see this net pension liability go away.
Right, because even with those changes, we're looking at the best case scenario of a 22-year pay down to being fully funded.
Right. It's not going to be anytime soon, even with some of those steps.
Okay, thank you.
The other
Can I
thing
ask a quick follow-on question?
Oh, sure.
Apologies. Yeah. Since this is sort of an allocated liability more from the state, what's the other side of it on our balance sheet that offsets that? Because it sounds like this is never a cash obligation the district has to pay. Where's the other side? Is that in equity and assets? Where does that go?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I was actually just going to discuss a little bit more about that. So the other side is this unrestricted net position. And so what that looks like is that the district looks underwater when you look just at the net position, but understanding that this net pension liability, which doesn't represent a true obligation of the district, at least not in any immediate sense. If you kind of factor out that net pension liability, and then you also have these deferred inflows of resources and deferred outflows of resources, that really kind of all three of those items should get netted to show the impact that the pension liability is having on this unrestricted balance. One thing to keep in mind is so the deferred inflows and the deferred outflows of resources, this net pension liability, which you can see if you look on the slides that were sent out, you'll see that this net pension liability has changed pretty drastically every year. A couple of years ago, there was a very significant change based on some of the actuarial assumptions that Para was using that then kind of smoothed out after they had some concerns with their investments, had to decrease the discount rate that they were using. It's kind of this whole process that they had to go through. It significantly increased the net pension liability for about 2 years, basically doubled it. And then it decreased back. So that could be a change of 700 million or so into the net pension liability. Governmental accounting standards didn't want, when they made this net pension liability a requirement, they didn't want an entity like Adams 12 to have to show 700 million for an actuarial change directly into your income statement, so into your expenses. So what they did was they created these deferred inflows and deferred outflows, which basically are the previous 4 years of changes to that net pension liability that slowly get smoothed out through these accounts. And so you're kind of showing that similar-ish amount of pension expense, or that change in pension expense each year. And so while there was a significant increase in the net pension liability for this year, about 100 million higher, you actually had about 100, let me get the exact number. I think it was 160 some, if I'm remembering right. This 163 million as a positive is actually the impact of the change in pensions from last year to this year. So while there was an increase in the net pension liability, because of these changes from previous years that are getting smoothed out into the current year, you actually had a positive impact. And so that 100 million increase in this liability is then going to really be shown over the next 4 years, along with the previous 3 years. So again, that's probably more information than really necessary, but mainly the point is that the changes in this net pension liability number do get smoothed out. So the change from last year to this year is not necessarily the exact income statement impact that you'll see to the district. Was there another question? I think I saw something pop up. Okay, if there isn't, we'll continue on. Those are really kind of, or that was kind of the significant part of the that long-term set of financial statements. Now I wanted to look a little bit more at the that current set of financial statements, which is really going to more closely resemble what would go into the district's annual budget. And so it's a lot more comparable with the fiscal year 21 budget to what was spent. So we'll take a look at the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. So on PDF page 52. So this is going to show on a current basis, so kind of focused within 1 year, the revenues and expenditures split out into each of the individual funds, which is also how the district budgets, shown for fiscal year 21. I know that this financial information is a bit dated, and so not quite as relevant as maybe some of the other monthly financial statements that you've been reviewing. So we'll kind of just cover some of the really big items that were impacting the financials this year. So one of the big items was the decrease in the state funding that was received through the state equalization. So I think that was about a $20 million or so decrease in the amount of funding that was received from the state. So you'll see that would be in this state revenue line. However, there was also a significant increase in the federal revenues, which would be in the grants fund here, relating to the COVID relief funding. So the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF, as well as the ESSER funding under the American Rescue Plan Act. And so those two did somewhat offset each other, with the decrease in the state funding offset with that increase in the federal funding. The other significant thing to keep in mind is the debt proceeds from the bonds that the district issued a couple of years ago. The district was still paying for those projects using those proceeds. And so you'll see in here that they're within this capital projects, or this building fund, you'll see a just shy of 41.5 million decrease in the net change in fund balance. So that could seem, like a really negative thing, that you're decreasing your fund balance by so much, but that's intentional, as the use of the cash proceeds that are received. Since this is current focused, you don't have that long-term debt shown. You just would have the cash that's now being spent on those projects. And then you still have just shy of 59 million left within that capital projects fund for future capital expenditures. So there was a total decrease of a little bit less than 25 million on that current basis. So when you factor out that, there was 40 million or so relating to spending of bond proceeds, that while the district's financial position on this current basis is not as strong as it was last year, that is intentional, and over 40 million of that was spending down of that bond proceed. So not really any significant changes in trajectory, I should say, with the current focused financial statements. I don't know, Susie or Mimi, if you have any other kind of comments or context that you'd like to add on this set of financials.
Sorry,
I
couldn't
don't.
find my mute. No, I think, I think John Paul covered everything there. We do plan to spend down fund balance in the general fund. And so that is why we had the negative 0.8 million, 8.5 million. And that is planned, or was planned. And, we continually plan to spend down some of those funds for some of the projects that we have going on. And that's all done through the budget process. And so nothing specific to say. The reason why it doesn't net out so drastically is because we do see that increase the fund balance in our bond redemption fund, which is used to pay down that debt. And so that is collections from property taxes. And so while that is a balance that is restricted, it still kind of helps us offset our long-term position within our financial statements.
Well, and to clear up a little bit on that explanation is we have a plan within the district where we're looking to go out potentially for bonds every so many years. I'll throw out number 6, but that might not be it, as we look at our blueprint work that we're working on. And part of the work that I've been doing since I joined the district is making sure that we're in a place where we can set our debt up so that we are not increasing the mills that we assign or that we have to levy our taxpayers. Part of that is defeasing or paying off some debt earlier than what would be required by the bond schedule. And so that's where some of this change in the fund balance has come from, specifically on the bond redemption. The other piece on that is in the general fund. Even though we do have plans to spend down fund balance, it does not mean that we do not have a significant amount of fund balance available to us. And we are definitely not in a place where we are concerned about the amount of fund balance we have on hand to meet any sort of emergencies that could come up.
This is Neva. I have a quick question. I don't know who wants to answer, but two things. One is, John, can we look at where the buy down is shown in the report that you were saying that when we bought down the bond proceeds? Can you show that one more time?
Sure. So
I couldn't see it that well.
yeah. So so the use of the debt proceeds would be in this capital projects building fund, and that would be specifically these lines right here. So this 27 million, 6.6 million, and another 10 million here within. So a total of 43.5 million spent on capital outlay. So that would be spending on new construction, renovations, etc. Would all be going into those items. And then the bond redemption fund, so the debt service, the payment on those bonds would be here with the principal and interest payments.
Okay, perfect. I just couldn't see it well, so thank you for going over that again.
Yep, absolutely.
And so I just had another question. So will we be continuing to see that offset in the net change in fund balances because of the structure of how we're getting money, revenues, and these buy downs that we're doing in the capital projects?
Sure.
So we'll continue to see that.
Sure. So the way that you would see on this set of financials for a bond issuance would be in this other financing sources and uses section down here. If there was a debt issuance, you'd see, if it was for $100 million, you'd see 100 million as an addition to fund balance down here.
Okay.
And then that would go onto the balance sheet side into cash. And then as that amount gets spent, it would probably be, if it's for capital purposes, which majority of the time it is, it would be into this capital outlay section, similar to how it's presented here for this year. So that's how you'd kind of see within the financials. You'd see it presented as an addition here, and then the payments for that capital outlay up here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That was all that I had.
Okay. Any other questions on the financial statements?
Did you touch on that 18,264 where your cursor is blinking, what that kind of transfer out other is? And did I miss that, or did you touch on that? I apologize.
Sure. No, I didn't. There's, we could probably spend a couple of hours going through all the different areas. So trying to touch on the, the biggest items, but the transfers out is just showing amounts or that revenues that came into the general fund, that the general fund is then moving into another fund. So you'll see the transfers out of 18.2 million here, and then the transfers in would be coming into this capital reserve for 6.8 million, and then into these other governmental funds for 11.4 million. All of the other governmental funds are shown, since there's a number of them, they're shown, and they're all smaller dollar amounts. They're shown in a separate schedule a little bit farther along within the report, rather than having this be 4 or 5 pages long with all the different funds. Those get combined, since they're smaller, into one column here. But that's going to be a lot of student activities, athletics, those types of things would be where the other transfers are going. So you'll see that the 18.2 million is both an increase in those funds and a decrease in the general fund. So you obviously didn't make or lose any money by moving funds from one hand to another.
Thank you. Yeah, it was in that other category. It was a big enough number. I just wanted to ask. Thank you for that.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's hard because these amounts were shown on the second page. So any other questions? All right, so we'll move into the next, and we'll move a little bit more quickly here, just kind of noting what each of these sections, what the purpose of them are. So the notes to the financial statements, this is going to include really the accounting policies and any additional information on any of the amounts presented within the financials. So that would be, you know, if you're interested in cash and investments, you know, you see the number there, but you want a little bit more information on it, you could come into the cash and investment footnote and see, you know, here's all of the different investments that the district has that then, you know, these amounts would then tie into those financial statements. So really kind of almost every amount that's shown on the financials then has additional information within these footnotes, kind of describing it in a lot more detail or otherwise kind of giving better explanation. So we won't go through all of those, but if you did have questions on any of the amounts in there, or wanted a little bit more information about some of those, you could find those within the footnotes. So we'll skip through the rest of the footnotes. You will notice that there's somewhere around 20 pages or so of required information relating to pensions within the footnotes. Basically, all of that information comes straight from para, and the district would then kind of copy paste that into the footnotes there. There is some trend information on the net pension liability shortly after the footnotes. So if you wanted to see how the net pension liability has changed or the payroll relating to the net pension liability, how that's changed over the last couple of years, you'd be able to see that in this schedule. There's also some, so here's the combining schedule. So this shows all of those other smaller funds that I had mentioned earlier that had the transfers from the general fund. So all those are shown here. And then there's some budget information. This is going to compare the original budget and the final budget compared to the actual amounts that are, or actual expenditures and revenues within the financial statements, and then the comparison of those. If you look through, each of the different funds are presented with a separate budgetary schedule. You'll notice that the final expenditures, the actual final expenditures compared to the final budget expenditures, the final budget expenditures are going to be greater than the actual expenditures in every single fund. And that's by design. That's actually a requirement of Colorado budget law. And so you'll see that because this number is a positive within all of the funds, that would be showing the district's compliance with that. Basically showing that the district's management didn't spend more than the district's board approved during the budget process. So after all of the budgetary information, there's going to be the statistical section. You'll normally know you're in the statistical section because suddenly you get a whole bunch of different columns for different years. Most of these schedules present 10 years of financial information or kind of other information. So this would, if you wanted to see some trends within the district, this is a good place to be able to see, you know, how have things progressed over the last 10 years. So otherwise, most of it is really just repeating what was already shown in the financial statements, along with some other kind of information surrounding the district. But otherwise, really just, it's interesting for some of the trends, but otherwise it's a whole lot of numbers in here. not necessarily something that you'd need to focus on unless you were looking for some specific trend. So with that, we'll kind of move into the single audit to kind of wrap up going through the financial statements. The single audit, as I mentioned towards the start of the presentation, is going to be the required audit over federal awards that the district receives. So we do have 2 additional reports from CLA within this section, and this would describe any of the findings that we would have as part of this audit. So those would be described within each of these 2 areas, as well as kind of more detail afterwards. We're pleased to report that we did not have any findings relating to the financial statements or relating to the single audit that we were required to report as part of this process. So it can be, I guess, big kudos to the district for going through the single audit without any findings. There's a lot of different compliance requirements, particularly with the new funding that was coming in and kind of the ever-changing, it felt, guidance that was coming out sometimes after the fact. And so, again, kudos to the district for making sure that compliance was met with all of those requirements and not having any issues that were reported as part of the audit. So the schedule of expenditures of federal awards is the listing of all of the federal awards that the district received during the year. So that's presented on this page. You'll see that the total federal awards for fiscal year 21 was just shy of 58 million, which is a pretty significant increase from previous years. And that's going to relate to the coronavirus relief fund. So this 15.8 million here, as well as the ESSER funding. So I think this is around 14 million up here. So those 2 amounts are really different than what the normal funding received in previous years would be. So wanted to highlight those. The rest of the amounts received are relatively, it's the same different programs that the district receives each year. And so those are, again, all presented within this schedule.
Quick question on the awards. Were
Yep.
any part of the COVID awards or other awards sort of a advance payment of future awards that you're getting now that we're not going to get later? I know sometimes the government does stuff like that where they say, oh, here's an award for you, but it's really more of an advance of something from the future. So there's sort of a penalty somewhere in the future. Is there anything buried in here with these awards that will impact the district in the future?
Sure. So it's actually pretty rare for the federal government to give money out in advance. Almost, the vast majority of the awards that they give are reimbursement basis. So they want to see proof that you incurred an allowable cost, and then they'll reimburse you for it. That being said, the coronavirus relief fund was paid in advance. And so a lot of this was actually received during fiscal year 20. And then allocated to fiscal year 21, basically the district being conservative on wanting to make sure that they were complying with all of the various requirements. So part of this was allocated to fiscal year 20, part of it allocated to fiscal year 21. So really this was cash received previously that's then getting shown as expenditures within fiscal year 21. None of the other amounts in here would relate to future years of amounts received. So this is going to be actually when the district incurs an expenditure funded by federal funding, it gets reported here. So nothing in here would then subsequently relate to future years.
Thank you.
Yep. And so following that, the schedule of findings and question costs This is a required schedule, so even though the district didn't have any findings or question costs, it still is included, basically to show that there were no findings, as you can see here. It does list that we're required to test specific federal programs, and this happens on a rotating basis through the significant programs that are listed within the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And so the program specifically that we tested this year would be the Special Education Cluster, or IDEA, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and then the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, which would be the ESSER funding. So those were the 3 programs that we were required to review. These 2 being new. Well, we looked at the Coronavirus Relief Fund last year as well, but these being COVID related, and the Special Education Cluster being an ongoing federal award that the district receives. And so this part would change each year. So we typically will test every significant federal award once every 3 years. This is where, if there were any findings, they would be reported in this section. But again, kudos to the district for not having any findings that were required to be reported. So there is, and I realize we're out of time, so I'll just make a brief mention of it. The governance communication letter, this would report any of our required information as part of the audit. This is pretty much going to look almost identical to last year, as there weren't really any significant changes that are required to be reported as part of the audit. So not really anything to point out that would be of significant concern or something that the committee should pay attention to within the governance communication letter. Then we did also have what's referred to as a management letter. This is going to include best practice recommendations. And similar to previous years, we have a best practice recommendation relating to fund balance. And that's going to be a recommendation about having a minimum fund balance policy within the general fund. As Susie mentioned, there's not a specific concern about the amount that's currently being held in the general fund, but as a best practice, having some policy that defines what the minimum fund balance that should be kept in the event of, significant issues or concerns like the pandemic, or, other, as we're seeing up in the kind of Superior and Boulder area with the fires that happen, things that the district could have a policy to keep a minimum amount of fund balance. So that's a similar best practice recommendation that we had from last year. So again, not an audit finding or something that we're concerned about, but just a best practice recommendation for the district's consideration. So that's, again, I know I went through the other 2 letters pretty quickly, but not a whole lot necessarily to highlight or emphasize within either of those. Any questions on the single audit or either of the 2 letters?
John Paul, I was just curious, this recommendation, I know it was the same as last year, but is that a recommendation that is being seen across many districts?
It just
Or is that
depends
something you
on,
can share?
sure, it just depends on the specific district and kind of their policies and what they're looking to, how they're looking to manage things going forward. This was a best practice recommendation that I know, discussing with Susie and Mimi, that they believe would also benefit the district. So these best practice recommendations, in talking with other districts, some management of other districts may not believe that a minimum fund balance policy would be something that they would like to have listed within here. And then some of them also already have a minimum fund balance policy. So it's just something to keep in mind. The district does have an additional committed amount Tabor. So that's already included within the financials. But this would just be kind of the district's assessment of what the minimum fund balance to keep within the general fund would be.
Okay, thank you.
Part of the benefit to the district is this comes up every time we go out to issue debt. The rating agencies are concerned that we do not have that fund balance policy.
Does anybody else have any other questions for John Paul?
Nope.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you, John Paul, for joining us today.
Absolutely.
And we will see you actually this evening for the board meeting, because we will be, John Paul will be presenting this at the board meeting this evening as well.
Yep, and we'll plan to be much more brief with the board meeting. I know we tried to go into more detail, make sure that the committee is kind of comfortable with everything that's included within the financials, but we'll be a lot more high level during the board meeting.
We greatly appreciate that. This is the committee that needs to be able to fully understand those financials and where to find things. So we greatly appreciate your time and effort today.
Yep, absolutely. And if there's any other questions or comments, things that you'd like to discuss, please feel free to reach out. And I'd be happy to discuss.
Okay, great. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and conclude this meeting. I believe our next meeting is scheduled for a month from now. And that session will include some working time. We've got continued review of 2.5 monitoring report, and then we'll have some working time to go over some of the bids and contracts that were in there, as well as that is part of your review as well. So we'll have hopefully about, I'm hoping about 30 minutes of working time that we can work on those items together as a group. Okay. Okay. Well, I hope everyone has a safe and warm day today. It is really slick out there if you haven't been on the road, so be super careful. And we will see all of you next month. And John Paul will see you this evening. And Amir will see you this evening.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Have a good day.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.